Story 1. The elevator that always came down at 3:17. This happened to me in 2017 when I worked the graveyard shift as a hospital security officer. It was a contract job. I'd done a few stints before: warehouses, parking decks, the occasional office tower. But this was my first time being posted at a hospital, St. Adeline's, small, regional. Most of the critical departments shut down after 10 p.m, with only the ER and morgue left operational through the night. My shift ran from 10:30 p.m. to 6:30 a.m, and I worked alone, unless you counted the nurses and orderlies, most of whom stayed behind their locked wings. The hospital wasn't understaffed. It was just tired. Faded beige walls, old lights that buzzed faintly. The kind of place that felt like it had never been fully awake. They had me posted on the 3rd floor, mostly just to monitor the south wing elevators and make rounds every hour. They didn't even give me a desk. Just a folding chair near the nurse station that hadn't been used in years. There was a vending machine behind me that sometimes dropped candy bars without being touched. The real issue didn't start until my 2nd week. I'd been tracking my fatigue, trying to stay sharp. You start strong around midnight, caffeinated and a little wired, but between 3 and 4 a.m, your body betrays you. Eyes burn, brain lags. You forget why you walked into a room. Some nights it felt like time itself softened, like it bent around you, quiet and shapeless. It was 3:17 a.m. when I noticed the elevator light for the basement flicker on. No one had called it. I waited, unsure if I imagined it. Then I heard the faint hum of its motor. The elevator was rising. I stood up instinctively. The digital panel above the door ticked through the numbers. B2, B1, ground. Then, nothing. The doors didn't open. The elevator didn't arrive. I stepped closer. The light above the door was off now. I waited another minute, then made a note in my logbook. The same thing happened the next night, 3:17 a.m. again, same silent ascent, same absence at the door. By the 4th night, I was standing in front of it before the time even hit. I'd stopped trying to stay seated. I needed to know if it was a malfunction or something else. At 3:17, like clockwork, the B2 button lit up. The elevator rose, and once again, it never arrived. That night, I stayed on the 3rd floor longer than I should have. I didn't do my rounds, I just stood by the elevator, waiting to catch a glimpse inside, something, anything. But all I saw was a flicker of movement through the gap in the doors, like someone standing in the back, not facing forward. I didn't report it, not yet. Instead, I tried adjusting my rounds to be in different spots at 3:17, just to see if it followed, and it did. No matter where I went, if I was within sight of a south wing elevator, it activated. Always at 3:17, always from the basement, never arriving. I started taking notes. I cross-referenced floor cameras, but the tapes always glitched during that time. Only for a minute or two, just long enough to miss the arrival. I asked the night receptionist if anyone else had logged complaints about the south elevators. She looked at me blankly. "Those elevators haven't worked in years," she said. There was always a single gurney left in the hallway near the elevator. No one admitted to using it. Eventually, he noticed the sheets were never changed. But there were impressions, like someone had lain there nightly. Objects don't need to move to haunt. They only need to be misremembered. The gurney appeared during my 3rd week. I noticed it during one of my early rounds, just past the service elevator, tucked in an alcove beside the fire extinguisher cabinet. It wasn't blocking anything, just waiting. The kind you'd use for transferring patients, with an adjustable headrest and thin plastic wheels. At first, I assumed someone had forgotten it, but after a few nights of walking past it at the same spot, I realized no one ever moved it. It was always there. Always with the same faded hospital sheet draped loosely over it. I asked around casually. One of the orderlies shrugged and said it was probably overflow from the ER. Another swore it wasn't theirs. I offered to return it myself, but he waved me off. "They'll grab it eventually," he said. They always do. But they didn't. The gurney never moved. After a while, I stopped thinking about it, until I noticed the impressions. I wouldn't have caught it if I hadn't paused one night, resting my clipboard on the rail. The sheet had slight indentations, 2 side by side. Faint, but unmistakably the outline of someone lying there. Head, shoulders, calves. Nothing heavy, just the shallow shape of a body that hadn't quite left. I stood there longer than I should have, wondering if the fabric could retain shape like that for days, or if the sheet had been changed at all. I placed my hand gently on the sheet. Cold. No warmth. But the impression held. The next night, the impressions were slightly deeper. Still, no one claimed it. I decided to do something simple. I tugged the sheet off completely, folded it, left the mattress bare. When I returned the next round, a fresh sheet had been placed. Same white creases, same shallow dips. But now, a faint stain, right near where the back of the head would be. Not blood, not sweat, just darker. I checked the cleaning logs. No mention of any linen changes in that corridor, nothing about the gurney. I asked the janitor on rotation if he'd seen anyone touch it. He just looked past me and said, "I try not to work that wing." No one would take responsibility. Eventually, I did the only thing I could. I moved it, wheeled it around the corner and into a storage closet near the defunct radiology wing, locked the door behind me. The following night, it was back. Same place, same sheet, same indentations. Psychologists studying liminality describe how transitional spaces, elevators, basements, waiting rooms, distort time and self-perception. The elevator became a metaphor, something always descending, arriving hollow, yet never truly empty. There's a theory I read once, in some half-forgotten psych journal someone left behind in the break room, about liminal spaces, transitional areas that aren't meant for staying. Stairwells, corridors, waiting rooms, places you pass through, not occupy. They say these spaces confuse the brain's perception of time, that the more you linger, the more your memory fractures. You start forgetting what brought you there, or why you stayed. By the 5th week, I began experiencing what I can only call time slippage. Minutes unaccounted for, notes in my logbook written in my own hand but not matching my rounds. One night, I found myself already standing in front of the south elevator, even though my last memory was refilling my thermos 2 floors down. I stared at the door, 3:17 a.m. The panel above flickered to life. B2, B1, ground. The doors opened. I don't remember pressing the call button. Inside, it was empty, but something wasn't right. The light inside the elevator was dimmer than the hallway. The floor was cleaner, too clean. No scuffs, no grit from nurses' shoes, like it hadn't been touched in years. A faint metallic scent clung to the corners, dry, old, almost sterile. I stepped closer, waiting for the doors to close. They didn't. It just waited, silent, open. I didn't enter. Not that night. But something followed me back into the corridor. Not a person, but the sense of something left ajar. An opening that hadn't been meant to open. I started seeing reflections in the glass of door panels that didn't match my posture. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection still facing the elevator long after I'd turned away. One night, I reached the security office after my shift and realized I hadn't spoken aloud in 8 hours. There are still things I can't explain. Why the elevator only activates at 3:17, why no one else hears it. Why I started seeing those same gurney indentations in other wings, storage closets, empty conference rooms, even the chapel. And why, when I finally worked up the nerve to enter the elevator at 3:17, it never moved. I stood inside for 20 minutes, doors open, nothing changed. But when I stepped out, my watch read 4:02. Now, years later, I still dream of that elevator, not moving, not broken, just waiting. Story 2. The overnight cleaner who wasn't on payroll. This happened in 2019 when I worked facility support for a corporate insurance building in Chicago. They called me a night operations liaison, but it was just a fancy title for what amounted to nighttime building maintenance. I wasn't janitorial, I didn't clean, but I was responsible for walking floors, checking utility closets, and making sure none of the contracted vendors left anything unsecured. It was a big glass tower, 22 floors, half empty after 5 p.m. My shift was 10 to 6, solo. Cameras in the elevators, but barely any in the hallways. The cleaning staff rotated every few weeks, outsourced to different contracts. I got used to new faces, different carts, different logos on their navy polo shirts. That's probably how I missed him at first. The first time I saw him was on the 14th floor, sometime around 2 a.m. I remember it clearly because I had just finished tightening a loose pipe under the kitchenette sink, and I was walking back toward the elevator when I passed him. He was wearing the standard gear: dark blue shirt, tan cargo pants, black gloves, pushing a basic janitorial cart with one mop, a closed bucket, a canister of wipes, and a small radio clipped to the front pocket. I nodded at him. He didn't look up. I figured he was new. The strange thing was, when I looked at the schedule later, there were only 2 assigned cleaners that night, both listed for floors 3 through 10, nothing above. I chalked it up to a scheduling error. But the next night, I saw him again. Same floor, same cart, same clothes. He was mopping near the elevator bay slowly in these long, deliberate arcs. Not sloppy like most guys trying to rush the shift. His strokes were rhythmic, like he was following something only he could see. I said, "Hey, man," just to get his attention. No response, not even a glance. His face wasn't blurred or shadowed. It was just blank, like he didn't register I was there. Late 40s, maybe. Pale, not sickly, just underlit. His ID badge was turned around, clipped backward. I went back to the facilities console on 3 and checked the sign-in sheet. Again, only 2 cleaners, assigned to the lower floors. I even texted my supervisor. He wrote back at 2:41 a.m. Could be someone from the day crew doing OT. Happens. Ignore unless they're blocking exits. I didn't ignore it. I started noting the time I saw him each night. 2:11, 2:08, 2:13. Always between 2 and 2:20. Always 14th floor. Once I tried following him after he turned the corner toward the old conference wing, but by the time I made the bend, the hallway was empty. No cart, no sound, no wet floor. I asked one of the contracted janitors the next night, casually, "You guys have anyone working 14?" I asked. He paused, brow creasing. "No, they closed those floors last year for mold abatement. We don't touch them." That stopped me cold. I asked how long it had been closed. He said over 10 months. The next night I took the stairs instead of the elevator just to see if I could hear anything. The 14th floor door was propped slightly open. I waited, and at 2:10 I heard the soft rubber squeak of wheels, the cart. But I didn't go in. Not yet. He moved methodically, not like someone with a shift, like someone with a ritual. One worker described it. He was dusting, like he knew the people, like he'd been watching them for years. When behavior doesn't match its setting, the brain rings an internal alarm, but softly, like a whisper beneath logic. I finally followed him on a Thursday. I waited near the stairwell. At exactly 2:12, the door creaked open and he passed me, cartwheels silent over the carpet. This time I moved behind him, slow, careful. He didn't look back. He turned left, down the hallway with the decommissioned office spaces, and disappeared through the glass doors to the old HR suite. I stood outside for nearly a full minute before easing the door open. It was cold inside, not AC cold, stagnant. The air didn't move. There were 10 cubicles, most stripped of equipment. No computers. Just a few empty desks, one tipped on its side. The floor was scuffed but dry. He was at the far end, dusting a photo frame. There were no pictures in the frame, just cracked glass and a bit of torn paper still stuck to the backing. He cleaned it like it mattered. Then he moved to the next desk, picked up a stapler, wiped the underside, set it down. Everything he did, every movement, was slow, with intention. Not like he was cleaning, more like restoring something. He paused at one of the chairs and straightened it carefully, making sure the legs aligned with the tiles. Then he placed his hand gently on the armrest. Just rested it there, not wiping, not moving, like he remembered who used to sit there. I backed out of the room before he saw me. My pulse was racing, but I couldn't explain why. Nothing he did was wrong exactly, just not appropriate, not aligned with the room. That's what got to me, the mismatch. The next night, I brought my phone, not to film, just to use the voice recorder. At 2:14, I heard it again, squeak, squeak, squeak. I stayed in the hallway this time, pressed against the wall. I kept the recorder going as he moved through the same route. I could hear the faint clinks of metal, the gentle rustle of cloth. When I played it back later, I heard something else, a voice, low, mumbled. I enhanced it using a free audio filter online. It was a name, repeated 3 times. Edith, Edith, Edith. There was no one named Edith listed in any of the old HR rosters I could find online, but there was a framed certificate still hanging by the elevators. Edith B. Lawrence, 32 years of dedicated service. It was dated 1996. The next night I stood by that plaque. At 2:09 he passed me. He didn't glance at the plaque, he just brushed his fingers against the wall as he walked past it. Not the frame, the wall beside it, like muscle memory. That's when I noticed something else. His shoes didn't match the uniform. They were old, black dress shoes, polished but worn at the heel. Not janitor shoes, not slip-resistant, just formal, the kind someone might wear to retire in, or be buried in. Research into robotic movement and the uncanny valley shows how near-human gestures disturb us more than inhuman ones. This cleaner's motions were too smooth, too measured, almost rehearsed. He wasn't working. He was remembering. On my final week in that job, I brought in a co-worker, Jared, another night shifter. He didn't believe any of it, but he agreed to stick around after his 11 p.m. floor checks. We waited on the 14th floor. At 2:10, nothing. 2:12, nothing. I started to sweat, wondered if it had stopped. Then, faintly, the door to the HR suite opened. Jared turned to me. How the hell did he get in there? I didn't answer. We stood side by side, watching. The man walked out pushing his cart. Same silent wheels, same backward ID badge. He turned right, even though that led to a locked stairwell. Jared whispered, "I think he's seen us." I wasn't sure. He never looked up. We followed. I stayed far enough back that I could barely hear the rubber of his cartwheels anymore, but then they stopped. When we turned the corner, he was standing still in the hallway, not facing us, just still. He turned his head slightly, not fully, just enough. Then he resumed walking, but it was different now, slower, each step deliberate, like a wind-up toy running low on tension, too smooth, too balanced, unnatural. I felt my stomach twist. Jared said, "I don't like this, man." We backed off, took the stairs down 2 flights and waited. Eventually, we walked back to the security office. Neither of us said much after that. I gave my 2 weeks the next day, not because I was afraid, but because I knew I was starting to notice things I shouldn't. There were gaps in the building directory, names I hadn't seen before, suddenly appearing in the badge logs. One night, someone swiped in at 1:57 a.m. using a code that had been deactivated in 2003. The badge photo was corrupted, just white, nothing. but it was logged to floor 14. When I told HR, they said that office hadn't been active in decades. No one had authorization to be there. I still think about that cleaner, about how his movements weren't labor. They were rehearsals, a slow pantomime of work, not for utility, but for memory, like he'd done this 1,000 times for people who hadn't come to work in years, like something was still being processed, but not cleaned, just repeated. Now, whenever I see a janitor late at night, I watch for the shoes, and I never check the badge. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Story 3. The emergency call that never came from dispatch. This happened in 2018, during my second year working nights at a long-term care facility just outside Wilmington. It was a small place, 35 beds, split between memory care and assisted living. We had one hallway for patients who needed constant monitoring and another for residents who were mostly independent, just needed meds, meals, and a place to sleep. The staff was thin at night. One nurse, one aide. Me. I handled admin, phone lines, and monitored the facility's PA and security systems. That included the intercom panel at the front desk, the one patients could call if they needed help but couldn't reach their nurse. It was an old system, wired back in the 80s, dusty green LEDs, and a faint whine of static if you leaned too close. Most of the calls came through clear enough, some fuzz, a click, then a voice. But that night, the voice didn't sound like anything I'd heard before. It started just after 3 a.m. The hallway lights were dimmed, the monitors silent. I was scanning logs when the panel clicked on by itself. No button press, no tone, just a low crackle of static, then a voice, soft, scratchy. The volume was low, but I could make out a rhythm, like syllables spoken too slowly. Pauses between each one, not robotic, just hesitant. Plea. Then a sharp cut. I froze. The light above the call button for room 6 had blinked, then gone dead. That's how the system worked. The light would stay on as long as the call was active. But this one barely flashed. I waited, thinking maybe they'd try again. Nothing. I checked the digital board. No new emergency lights triggered. No calls to dispatch. Still, I walked the hall just to be sure. Room 6 was dark. No sound inside. The chart said it was unoccupied. The resident, a man named Walter Green, had passed 4 days earlier. Complications from surgery. The room was scheduled to be cleaned and prepped later that week. I stood outside the door for a full minute, just listening. The intercom light hadn't lit since. I pressed the button on the wall inside the room just to test it. It worked, crackled, then stayed lit as I held it down. So whatever activated it earlier didn't use the panel inside. It was triggered remotely, by nothing. I told the nurse on duty the next morning. She frowned but didn't laugh. "Room 6, she asked. I nodded. She didn't say anything else, just turned and started prepping the meds. When she finally entered room 6, the sheets were folded. The monitor was off, but there was a faint outline on the mattress, as if someone had been sitting, not lying down. Absence becomes terrifying when it leaves evidence. 2 nights later, I checked the chart again. Room 6 was still unassigned. Cleaning hadn't been completed. I told myself I was just being cautious, but I walked down the hall around 2:45 a.m. before anything could happen. I paused by the door. Something felt wrong, not threatening, just slightly misaligned, like the pressure in the hallway was heavier near the threshold. I opened the door. The lights were off. The room smelled faintly of bleach, but also warmth. Like old laundry, not dirty, just lived in. The bed was made, corners tucked, pillow centered. I stepped closer. That's when I noticed the mattress. There was an impression, right near the edge, beside the call button. It wasn't shaped like a lying body, More like someone had been sitting there, knees bent, hands resting beside them, the kind of indentation you get from perching on the edge, maybe to tie your shoes, maybe to wait. But no one had been in that room. I ran my palm across it, cold, but the shape was perfect. I checked the cabinet drawers, still empty. The IV pole was unused, monitor unplugged. But the floor, someone had walked across it. The dust had shifted, a faint trail of sock prints from the door to the bed and back again. I didn't mention this to anyone. I just logged routine visual check, room secure, and moved on. But the next night, at the exact same time, 3:03 a.m., the intercom crackled again. This time, the voice was clearer, still halting, still strained, but this time it said something different. It was like a mouth learning how to form sound, and it was coming from the same panel. Room 6. I stepped back from the desk, not even realizing I was holding my breath. The voice didn't continue, just one string of stilted syllables. Then nothing. I played it off again. Maybe a glitch in the system, but deep down I knew that sound. Not the words, but the way they were spoken. Years earlier, my grandfather had suffered a major stroke. I'd visited him at the rehab facility almost daily. I'd sit beside him while he tried to speak, struggling to remember how his mouth worked, how to connect syllables to meaning. That's how this sounded. Not like a patient calling for help, but like a voice learning to call. Healthcare workers under chronic night shift stress often report auditory anomalies and temporal displacements. But in this case, the morning nurse heard the same voice through the speaker and recognized the deceased patient's cadence. Sometimes death doesn't repeat, it recurs. I didn't expect anyone to believe me. Night shift staff are known for hearing things, auditory blips, machines resetting, pressure doors clicking shut with no cause. There are whole studies about it. Sensory anomalies during circadian disruption. Your brain misfires. But 2 nights later, I wasn't the only one on call. Ruth, one of the senior nurses, stayed late to cover for a no-show. She was tough, mid-50s, pragmatic to the bone. The kind of nurse that doesn't scare easy. It was around 3:15 when the panel crackled again. Same voice. This time, it was longer. Wah, ter... The syllables slurred, like someone parched. Ruth stopped cold. She looked at me, eyes wide. "You heard that?" I nodded. "Jesus," she muttered. "That was Walter." My stomach dropped. What? That voice, that pattern, that tone. He had that same cadence after his operation. He used to call me, not by name, but in that exact rhythm. You don't forget it. We went to room 6 together. No one inside. The bed was still made, but something had changed. The water cup on the tray table was half empty. It had been full earlier. I'd seen it myself. I looked at Ruth. Her expression shifted. Not afraid, exactly. Just deeply unsettled. She whispered something under her breath I didn't catch. I asked if she was okay. "I used to say goodnight to him," she said quietly, "before the surgery, even after he stopped responding. I'd say it when I shut off his light." She paused. "I still do it out of habit." That night, she left early. The next day, I accessed the audio log from the intercom system. I wanted to confirm what I'd heard. The panel should have recorded any verbal activation, but there was nothing. Just white noise, no spike in volume, no speech patterns, not even background hum. It was as if the voice had only existed in real time, no trace left behind. I stopped sleeping properly after that. I'd wake up from shallow dreams, thinking I heard that same slow syllable drawn through the air. One night I decided to test something. I went into room 6 at 3:02 a.m. and sat on the edge of the bed, right where the impressions always were. I didn't touch anything. I just sat and listened. At 3:08, the intercom panel in the hallway lit up, even though no one was outside to push it. I stood slowly, walked out. The light went dead the second I crossed the threshold. I checked the monitor at the front desk. Static. Then the call log updated. Room 6, active, duration 0.01 on 13. The room had called itself. I told the director I couldn't work nights anymore. No one fought me on it. 3 months later, the facility was sold. The new owners gutted half the building for renovations. Room 6 was converted into storage. But I still get calls from Ruth every now and then. She says it happens even now, always around 3. A faint voice in the hall, barely audible. Not saying her name, but saying it like it used to know her, like it's trying to find the shape of the word, like it's still trying to speak.